A big ceremony in St George's Square opens Glasgow's 5-week campaign against tuberculosis, the biggest mass X-ray in history. The Lord Provost of Glasgow helps a schoolgirl to cut the tape, and the campaign is on. 37 torchbearers spread outwards from the square, carrying the campaign's message to every ward of the city. Glasgow plans to X-ray 250,000 people during the 5 weeks at dozens of centres and mobile clinics. First to be X-rayed are the Secretary of State for Scotland and the Lord Provost. 37 mobile X-ray units, the biggest fleet ever gathered together, have converged on Glasgow from all parts of the British Isles. Each unit weighs 14.5 tons. This help from over the border is very welcome, for Glasgow has the highest tuberculosis rate in Western Europe, and nothing short of all-out medical war will conquer the terrible disease.
For too long, daily life has been a fight against overcrowding, sickness, disease, and death.
The level of poverty and deprivation in the East End of Glasgow is unrepeated anywhere in Western Europe. Male longevity in parts of east of Glasgow are on a par with sub-Saharan Africa. So let's not hear about the left behind.
They took longer to heal their wounds in the East End. All the hospitals I'd worked in previously, if you did an abdominal incision, by about 8 to 10 days it was healed up and they could go home. In the Royal, it was about 10, 11 days. Subtle, but it wasn't just me. Others had noticed it. And we put it down to the fact that, well, they smoke more, they eat the wrong kinds of food, and so on. That will slow down healing. But over the next few years, it became very plain to me that that wasn't the cause.
The life expectancy in Glasgow, in the East End of Glasgow, which is where the First Minister has her constituency, in the East End of Glasgow, life expectancy for a man is 64.
Dear me.
Which means that a man is likely to die before he qualifies for his state pension.
Yeah.
And it means that life expectancy in the East End of Glasgow is lower than in sub-Saharan East Africa, in Mongolia, in Pakistan.
Would you like to make a donation to the Save the Daughter Fund?
How long have you been out of work exactly, Chief?
Welcome once again to Dirty Dick's Motorways Car. For another gander at how to cook up the meals that we serve out to our clientele.
We always have a right good drink on a Tuesday, isn't that right, Eric?
Aye. You see these spots here? Those chart the progress of the disease known as cirrhosis.
What you try to tell me?
I'm telling you, very simply, that unless you drastically reduce the level of your alcohol intake, you will be dead within a year.
Where are you going?
Where am I going? Where the hell do you think I'm going after a bit of news like that? I'm going to get bloated. Behaviour, bloody hell.
Can you no read?
Aye, I can read. I can read perfectly well. Says Nosmo King. Yeah, he's a good guy, Nosmo.
Smoking doesn't just give people lung cancer. It increases the risk of cancer of the mouth, cancer of the larynx, cancer of the esophagus, cancer of the kidney, cancer of the pancreas, and cancer of the bladder. Not to mention coronary heart disease, a cerebrovascular disease, atherosclerotic peripheral vascular disease, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. No wonder it's a dying habit.
We put it down to the fact that, well, they smoke more, they eat the wrong kinds of food, and so on.
So what accounts for this horrible space here between us up here in southern Scotland and the south? Now, we know about smoking, deep-fried Mars bars, chips, the Glasgow diet, all of these things, but this graph is after taking into account all of these known risk factors. This is after accounting for smoking, social class, diet, all those other known risk factors. We are left with this missing space of increased deaths the further north you go.
Over the next few years, it became very plain to me that that wasn't the cause. And since then, in the last 25 years, our analysis has shown that, now don't get me wrong, smoking is very, very bad for you, okay? If anyone here smokes, stop it at once. But we cannot ascribe the gap between rich and poor to the commonly held beliefs of smoking, fatty diet. These have an effect, but they don't explain nearly enough of it.
Well, we initially found that vitamin D was extremely important in maintaining strong bones, strong teeth, and strong muscles.
You go. Now, sunlight, of course, comes into this. And vitamin D has had a great deal of press, and a lot of people get concerned about it. And we need vitamin D. It's now a requirement that children have a certain amount. My grandmother grew up in Glasgow back in the 1920s and 30s when rickets was a real problem, and cod liver oil was brought in. And that really prevented the rickets that used to be common in this city. And I, as a child, was fed cod liver oil by my grandmother. Nobody forgets cod liver oil. And there's an association. The higher people's blood levels of vitamin D are, the less heart disease they have, the less cancer. There seems to be a lot of data suggesting that vitamin D is very good for you, and it is, to prevent rickets and so on. But if you give people vitamin D supplements, you don't change that high rate of heart disease. And the evidence for it preventing cancers is not yet great. So what I'm going to suggest is that vitamin D is not the only story in town. It's not the only reason.
In its day, Glasgow was both spacious and elegant. But with time, it became more and more congested. Its population increased. Its boundaries were stretched. Glasgow was overcrowded. one massive redevelopment wasn't enough. There was a need for rethinking, a new concept, the idea of completely new towns.
A key event that drove the population into a further state of vulnerability was the socially selective New Towns programme of the 1960s.
New towns, but where? Most of the Clyde Valley was already built up. Much of the remainder was designated as Greenbelt. Some was too valuable as agricultural land or too rich in minerals. But 15 miles to the northeast of Glasgow, there was one possible site.
This programme was the start of a regional modernisation agenda designed to divert industry away from the inner city. It held the promise of modern housing and factories, new employment opportunities, and a restart for many families. Sections of the population were selected for relocation.
When they built the new towns to deal with the population overspill, with shortage of houses, not everyone was allowed to move to a new town. You had to have a skill, you had to have a trade. They targeted particularly younger families with children. And there's explicit mention in some of the government documents from the time that we found of skimming the cream of the population. But the really crucial point about it is that they themselves were aware of the problems this was having in creating this vulnerable population, but they kept doing it for decades. There was all sorts of problems facing Glasgow in terms of housing shortages and housing quality. There were actions taken first by local government to try and address that. They were not very well thought out and created problems for the city. But in addition, there were actions taken by the Scottish Office, which is obviously the department of the UK government responsible for implementing UK policy, which again had a further adverse effect on the population. And so they were aware of the problems facing the city. They had no confidence that what local government was doing was going to solve the problems. So they embarked on a series of policies that you can only really describe as writing off the city. Glasgow was officially designated a declining city. All economic investment was to be made away from the city. As part of that process, they moved industry away and also sections of the population.